Hello and welcome This Can Happen attendees. This session today is Caught in the Middle, the Pressures of the Growing Sandwich Generation. My name is Sarah Beth Persiani and I am thrilled to be facilitating this panel discussion today and to be with all of you. Before I introduce the panel, a few housekeeping things. The format for today is that we invite you to use the chat buttons on your screen to submit any questions that you might have for us. All questions are anonymous, and we will be reserving time at the end, about 10 minutes to get to those questions, so please feel free. Before, again, I have panelists do their introductions, I want to visit our objective for today to make sure that we're all on the same page. And you're going to notice that I might look down on occasion to read. I'm unapologetic sometimes when I read. I feel like it's better to do that than to have that moment where you drift off and everyone's waiting for what to say. So to make sure I get it right, the objective for what we're all accomplishing here today is to meet and to discuss the intensified pressures that people in the sandwich generation face as a result of both their care burdens and work responsibilities. And we're going to look at how this impacts mental health and well-being and pay particular mind to how employers can be supportive and help to implement positive change, especially in context of COVID and what we're all experiencing. We have some wonderful expertise here today that I'm thrilled to be part of and to listen and to learn from as well. I'll introduce our panelists' names and then I'll allow them to do their own introductions. We have Madeline Starr, the Director of Business, Innovation and Development at CARES UK. We have Chris Biagiotti Bridges, the Principal Business Consultant at Dell. And we have Nisha Johnson, General Manager, Ethicon Great Britain, which is a division of Johnson & Johnson. So panelists, thank you all. If I could ask you to do a brief introduction as to your background, and then of course, I'm going to go at the end. And let's start with you, Madeline.
Well, first to say I'm absolutely delighted to be here because this is such a significant issue and it's an issue we have seen grow like topsy in COVID-19, so couldn't be a better time to be discussing this. I've been with CARES UK for a long time, 21 years. Our mission is simply to make life better for unpaid carers. So I've seen a lot of change, but what I've never seen change is the pressure that carers face if they aren't supported. We know that if they're not supported, they face penalties in terms of their health and well-being, and that includes mental health and well-being, as well as financial penalties and penalties in terms of social isolation. And a large part of my work with CARES UK has been to grow and develop our support for employers who are trying themselves to develop a carer-friendly working culture that can really support their employees and to help to retain top talent.
That's great. Thank you very much. Nisha, if you could go, please.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. I care passionately about this topic, actually, and I think I completely agree with what you said, Madeline. I don't think there's ever been a more important time for us to be talking about the impact of the current environment on everyone's mental health and mental fitness as well. And that's something that we talk a lot about at Johnson & Johnson. You know, we're a healthcare company devoted to improving healthcare, but so much of our work has to be devoted to having the world's healthiest workforce well, and that's part of our key mission. So really, really pleased to be here. I manage a team of about 200 people here in the UK, and we are focused very much on medical devices in the healthcare setting. So these are devices for surgery. So we've got a really diverse team made up of individuals all over the country. So I think we've got a really broad spectrum of issues that people are facing and challenges that we're really working hard to resolve. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. Thank you very much. Okay, Christine, you're up.
Well, like both of the ladies before me, I agree. This is a very important topic we should be talking about right now. I've been with Dell for 17 years now. My day job is in IT, but my passion and volunteer work is in the disability and caregiving space through our employee resource groups. For me, it's a personal a personal connection. I have a daughter who is nearly 26 years old, has complex medical needs, and I have a stepson who has Landau-Kleffner, and he's on the autism spectrum. And through all of this, I have cared for my father and my grandmother. So it's definitely a topic that is front and foremost in a lot of people's minds right now. And I'll be able to share with you some of the strategies that we're implementing at Dell and how we're getting involved to try to make a difference in this space.
That sounds great. And we're looking forward to hearing that and really all of the experiences that we can share of our personal stories and how our workplace is working to support us. So in terms of my background, I have the majority of my career was spent in large tech companies and corporate universities. So I was at Lotus before IBM bought them, and EMC before Dell bought them. And I did instruction and corporate and course development and curriculum development. So in an effort for work-life balance, I transitioned to a university position. And at that time, we also had our daughter. And one thing they said to me often is, when you have children, you need the help and support of your family. So we transitioned closer to home, which meant for us moving away from the city, and we moved home. And the help and support that we were looking forward to getting turned out to be the help and support that we began giving to my elderly parents. My mom became very sick with breast cancer and then lung cancer. So for a period of 5 very intense years, my husband and I became caregivers with raising our own daughter and having our elderly parents to take care of. And we experienced a lot of loss in that time. Over that course, we lost my mom, we lost my dad, we lost my sister to pancreatic cancer. And I should share, so it was my mom had lung cancer, my dad had dementia, and then also congestive heart failure. And I was the primary caregiver for him for the final 2 years. Those were the most intense. And so I did what you tend to do. You go heads down and you become the helper. You do the bill paying for 2 houses and the cleaning for 2 houses and the errands and the doctor's appointments and the medication and all of those things that I think we're going to talk about, and I think a lot of people have experience with. But ironically, it wasn't until all the dust had settled and my dad had passed that I resigned from my university position. A complete emotional wreck. And I think I experienced some PTSD type of symptoms where I would recycle and rehash conversations and always ask myself, what was it I could have done better? Conversations I had in the workplace with the care team. Why didn't I know disease progression better? Really chiding myself for not doing a better job. I ended up writing down those experiences in a book. It was really a form of catharsis to write it down, to give myself some therapy to let it go. And I also founded my company called We Are Sharing the Sun. And my focus now is to help companies understand the complexities of caregiving, to help individuals like myself be more authentic about what it is they're going through. Because during that whole 5-year period where I was fetching soup and running to the doctor, I was the stoic Sarah Beth at work. I kept it bottled up. I came home and took care of my family and did what I had to do. So I really think that this is such a valuable discussion that we can have today, so we can maybe change that stoicism that we see. So that's a little bit about me. So let's get into this. One word I'd like to ask each of the panelists, if you could share, please. Give thought to just one word that you would use to describe what it means to you to be part of the sandwich generation. And let's go with you first, Chris.
I would say overwhelmed, to try to put a word around, caring for 2 generations, top and bottom, dealing with pediatrics and geriatrics, overwhelmed, and holding down a full-time job.
That's right. That's right. Okay, Nisha, how about you?
Expectation, and I think that comes from 2 parts. Expectations that I have for myself, but from a career perspective, but also alongside all my other jobs, right? Mum, wife, daughter, sister, daughter-in-law, sister-in-law, and juggling a career and all of those things are, not easy. And many people face into these. These are not unique issues or challenges by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely the amount of expectation that I place on myself, I perceive that I have, to me, I think is how I would sum it up in one word.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Madeline?
I think relentless, because there is absolutely no let up and very often no opportunity for a break. So one report published last year in Carers Week in the UK found that sandwich generation carers often have no more than half an hour a day to themselves. And I found myself thinking back then, what would I do with that half an hour a day? Would I watch half of the news? Would I, read for half an hour? Or would I simply sit in a chair aghast that after half an hour, it all started all over again? So, yeah, for me, I think it's just relentless.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. And for me, I'll go quickly. I would say I was mostly pissed off. And I know in the UK, I think being pissed means something different for us than in the States. And I promise I wasn't drunk. I was just ornery. I was going from place to place, just getting it done, very heads down, I've got to get this done. And I think that was the persona that I might have brought into the workplace too, which unfortunately wasn't the best. Okay, so thank you for that. I want to just quickly read a little bit more context and then we'll ask some questions specifically, because I think just as in the statistic that Madeline just shared, this is very important, very relevant. So according to the Office of National Statistics, ONS, the sandwich generation subset in the UK is 1.3 million people. 1/3 of this group who care for more than 20 hours per week report feelings of anxiety and depression. 1 in 7 people who give care between 10 and 19 hours a week are full-time employed. And there's further breakouts of that data subset that show that 30% are very dissatisfied with their life. In general, about half the people in the sandwich generation have 4 hours or less for themselves each week. And as Madeline just shared, that's less than 35 minutes a day. Just imagine that. And according to some Aviva statistics, 1/3 of the sandwich generation adults feel that caring duties negatively impact their mental health and quality of life. I thank the staff conference for pulling together these very poignant and very relevant statistics. And one final one in context of COVID. So the situation that we're in with this pandemic, there's been an increase of 4.5 million new carers during this lockdown in the UK, 2.8 million of which are working. So the numbers are staggering. The effects that we're all experiencing from the pandemic is further exacerbating the stress and the pressures on our mental health. So that really does set the tone, if we haven't already. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, Chris, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about your journey, and then as you alluded to earlier, how Dell has supported you with this.
So having obviously children with special needs has its challenges in its own, but then you add in having to care for a father or a grandmother, and you're bringing together 2 totally different worlds. There are different needs for the pediatric community. There are different needs for the geriatric community. So I struggled, bouncing between the 2. We're bringing in COVID here, and I will say for me right now, the struggle is real when it comes to my daughter's adult day program is closed because she cannot wear a mask. She cannot attend. So when I would be at work during the day, she would be at her adult day program. Now we're all home together. And so trying to juggle that, who's here to watch Kayla while I'm on conference calls? Who's here, do I have a staff member that has screened negative for COVID? Can they come to the house? And then my stepson, Matthew, goes to a school specifically for children with autism, and he's a day student. So we've had to balance the school being closed for 3 months, having him home, and the challenges of keeping him busy because he's a very busy boy, and trying to do the remote learning, which he's not one to want to sit in front of a computer and do that. So we've spun up a whole, crazy bunch of things going on right now. Over the years, when I first started at Dell, the very first interview, I explained my situation. I told them up front I was a caregiver and that I would give them 110%, but I needed to know that if I had to do a doctor's appointment with my dad or my daughter during the middle of the day, that I had that flexibility. And for me, I felt I didn't want to waste their time if they weren't open to it, but I also didn't want to waste my time working for somebody who was going to just add that extra layer of stress. I got the job. It's been wonderful over the years. And what I've learned through all of this is Dell has offered our employee resource groups as an available option for people to find other employees that have those like connections. So our caregiving ERG is called Family Balance. And I also am the North America co-lead for our True Abilities Employee Resource Group, which is for our families with disabilities. And being able to make those connections with the caregivers or other families that are facing challenges in the disability space has really been that piece I needed. And I don't want to say it's my mental health piece, but some days I feel like that's where I'm making that connection with my fellow employees. And it can take my mind off worrying about, what is everybody else thinking about this? I can go to somebody who's facing the same challenges as me and say, hey, did you think about doing this? Did you think about doing that? So that's been really helpful. And over the years, I've gotten more and more involved with our leadership within Dell and diversity and inclusion and our employee resource groups. And through COVID, we've taken this opportunity to promote more resources to our employees. We have 3 weeks of paid time off for anything related to COVID right now. If you have to take care of your parent during COVID, your child, more services are available through our employee assistance program so that you have that ability to take that time for yourself. I certainly have utilized that over the years when I feel totally overwhelmed and have learned that I'm not going to be good to anybody else if I don't take care of myself first. And I've made that an important part of my routine over the years as a caregiver. And from a corporate perspective, Dell is part of the Boston Chamber of Commerce here in Massachusetts, and they have something called the Business Roundtable. And right now, local corporations in Massachusetts are meeting on a regular basis to talk about these caregiving topics, whether it's what's going on in the workplace, what's going on in somebody's personal life, and bringing all these entities together. And for Dell, this is the first time we've ever joined something like this, so we can hear what other companies are doing and how can we bring that into our culture and offer it to our employees.
That sounds great, Chris, and thank you for that. And I think we'll be talking about some of those policy type things that we can affect also in the UK. So I appreciate you sharing that, because it's the corporate benefits that you mentioned, but I also really heard you say it's the informal supports. So as much as companies can offer the financial or the legal or the paid time off policies, it's also really helpful to have that informal employee resource group or affinity group where you can connect and just talk with other people who are going through what you are. And that's really powerful. So thank you for that. If I could transition now and ask Nisha, how did Johnson & Johnson support you with your caregiving responsibilities during this pandemic? And what can employers learn from this as we find ourselves potentially in future lockdowns?
Yeah, well, at J&J, we're really fortunate that, we talk about the health and well-being of our employees all of the time. And as a healthcare company, it's important we talk about physical health, but also more importantly, probably about mental health as well. And it's very much driven by leadership. And I think what that means is that it creates a very open environment for all of us to speak with our managers and our colleagues about our health in general. And that does always include a conversation about our mental health. So during this whole period, it's, having 2 young children at home during a lockdown and not at school, plus 2 full-time jobs and lots of other people to worry about and try and keep in contact with despite not being able to visit them and keep an eye on has been, I would say, really quite challenging and emotionally quite tough. But I would say also that, a couple of weeks in, my boss did say to me, having you at 70% or 60% is totally fine. I'd rather have that than you at 100%. And it really stuck with me. And what it made me really think about in relationship to this question was that you can have all kinds of policies in place, and I think you can have conversations, but ultimately it does come down to the human to human connection and the quality of a conversation that you can have with the people that you work with about what's going on for you and how you're managing. And that's one thing that did really stick with me. I think in addition to that, we were all juggling a huge number of pressures, and for a team of 200, having everybody on Zoom calls or Teams calls all day, it's not really that conducive to balancing lots and lots of other demands. So very quickly we realised that we needed to tell people that they did not need to be present for every meeting, that we would record sessions, that they could be flexible about when they participated or engaged with that content or those messages. We really moved very quickly to people turning their cameras off, because I think that put a lot of pressure on people to sort of show up in a specific way, looking like they were managing, which is easy, right, for an hour, but sometimes the course of a whole day, not that straightforward. So I think there were small practical things in terms of expectation that we tried to resolve quite quickly. We put a half day a week, it doesn't sound like much, but on a Wednesday afternoon, no meetings, and then we've stretched that to Friday afternoons, no meetings, and a really protected lunch hour, which has really made a difference. People don't send emails or have calls between 12 and 1. That gives people a break, right, to recalibrate, get set again, get people back on track with their schoolwork or their meals. And God knows children need about 84 meals a day, it seems, with them constantly. But I think practical conversations, but also I think what it really comes down to is open and honest, really transparent conversations between you, your manager, and really what the expectation is. And I think if you get that happening in small companies or big companies where people really are having honest interaction, I think that really matters. And I think J&J has done a phenomenal job of making these conversations okay to have, actually, more and more in the last couple of months.
Wow, I love that. That's wonderful. The 70% comment from your manager, wonderful. Open, honest, transparent discussions, just wonderful best practices in and of itself. Thank you. Okay, Madeline, you're up. I'm curious to know how Carers UK is helping employers recognize the pressures and the struggles that Sandwich Generation employees experience.
We have a membership forum for employers called Employers for Carers, which we launched in 2009. And we have a growing membership, almost 225 employers now who between them employ 3.5 million plus people. In COVID, we're seeing 1 in 4 people combining work and care. So that's the potential to reach a lot of people. And our job really is to help them to understand the challenges that face working carers and to develop workplace policies and practices that can support them. And we do that through platforms of digital resources so that they can cascade resources throughout an entire organisation. But we also provide face-to-face opportunities for diagnostics, lunch and learn sessions, and a significant number of networking events. And actually in COVID, a significant number more of virtual networking events where we get employers together to talk to each other about the challenges they face. And we find that absolutely invaluable as they share their own practice. So we've done 2 reports in COVID. Carers UK have done 2 reports in COVID looking at the additional pressures on carers. The first found 70% of carers providing more care. The second found 81% of carers providing more care, with 74% of those experiencing significant stress and impacts on their mental well-being, 55% just totally overwhelmed. So we're back to that word, overwhelmed. But very interestingly, we have just done too a survey of our Employers for Carers membership, got a good response, over 50% back from our members, and we found something really quite extraordinary from them. That 74% in COVID have offered additional support. So they've really stepped up the support they offer. And that's primarily or top of the list was health and wellbeing support. How interesting was that? With 90% providing more health and wellbeing support, but also working much harder to get people and keep people connected. And that's not only connected with them as an employer, but connected with each other, and really ensuring that some of those workplace support groups that we've heard Nisha talk about so compellingly could continue to meet. And actually we've seen those grow in the pandemic. But they did also offer additional leave arrangements, flexible working arrangements. We heard back very much that comment: we don't expect 100% of you. We want you to give us what you can. A real move away from any kind of presenteeism on the screen, but really helping people to understand that what they could fit in and that helped them manage and enabled them to combine both work and care was good enough. They wanted them, they wanted enough of them as they could have, but they were absolutely not going to put them under pressure. And all of them talk about the importance of having that conversation. We know that top of the list of what working carers say they need from employers is understanding. They need everything else. Of course, they need all the policies, practice. They need the EAPs, the health and wellbeing support, but they want someone to know how it feels, and they want that to be shared with colleagues too. And employers have interested themselves in this pandemic in what is happening at home with their staff. They've really made an effort to understand what those pressures are. They know if someone is at home trying to homeschool and manage a disabled parent or a disabled child and do their job. They're understanding that. They're taking an interest in services. I mean, so many of the pressures we're seeing in COVID are because those day services and respite services have closed down. I mean, we heard that from Chris. And so, people are now at home. They may be at home with a disabled child and a child in a mainstream school environment, or at home with a child, disabled spouse. This has been such a tough call for carers, and we know what the toll that those pressures have taken. But we have actually too seen a really promising and encouraging response from employers. The important thing now is that we don't lose this going forward, and that this becomes business as usual as we come out the other side of this pandemic.
Exactly. And let me ask you this as well, and to all the panelists. Madeline had mentioned at the beginning, the less than 35 minutes a day that carers have to just, what do I do with that precious time? Do I watch TV? Do I do a load of laundry? Do I stare at the wall? So, back to that question of what's the corporate responsibility? How is there a role for employers to help change that? What can employers do to help change that? Madeline, I'll start with you again.
Well, I think taking this interest, understanding what helps to relieve those pressures is so important, and that might not necessarily be something that the employer themselves can do. What I really want to see is employers become engaged in the debate on care and how it is provided by external services into families. In the UK, that for me would constitute them getting involved in the social care debate that we've been promised for such a very long time. When employers started taking an interest in childcare, it absolutely transformed the supply of childcare in the UK. Once we had a national childcare strategy predicated on the ability of women to work, and it was women at that point largely, women returning from maternity leave, it absolutely transformed the way that we did childcare. And we need to see this. Care services need to be a condition for employment, for employers, every bit as important as utilities or a transport system. We are all going to be facing a caring situation at some point in our lives. If we're not doing it now, and many of us are, it's coming our way. And we have to keep a shrinking workforce active in the economy. So it's an absolute win to say, right, how do we develop flexible, affordable, accessible care services that enable people to combine a working life with care, which is, after all, something that they want to do. None of us want to walk away from this caring responsibility, but we don't want it to steamroller us, and we want to be able to live a life that includes that caring role and includes our work.
Nicely said. And on that note, I'm just going to build from that. So ideally, no employee should have to choose between their job and their caregiving responsibilities. That's the ideal world. But unfortunately, COVID is exacerbating the situation, and we've talked about all of the existing, the new pressures on us. And there was a recent McKinsey study that was done where they showed that women especially are leaving the workforce in numbers. What advice would the panel give to a colleague who is contemplating leaving the workforce? And I'm going to toss it to you, Nisha.
Yeah, I mean, this speaks to another issue that I'm really passionate about, and I think this is about keeping women in the workforce. We've got some extraordinary talent, and when caregiving responsibilities fall to women, largely, this is a real issue, right? We lose incredible skill and capability from the workforce the whole time. So I think, I've had a very recent example of this in my own organisation, and it basically came down to having a really honest, frank conversation. This individual tendered their resignation to us. It was kind of a surprise. We knew that she'd been facing a lot of personal challenges, both from a family pressure perspective, caregiving responsibilities, also extreme financial pressure, and felt that she really couldn't do the job that she was employed to do. And so she took the decision to take some time out to kind of reflect on her choices and took that choice without really explaining any of the intricacies of it to us and didn't want to share it. When we eventually got down to it, we ended up in a compromise where she took a year-long sabbatical. It started in October, and I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, just to give us some time to reflect. Really changing dynamics and circumstances right now. Things might look very different 12 months on, but to give her that opportunity to return to the business, because we for sure would love to retain her skills and capabilities. And while she wasn't necessarily in a place where she felt that she could offer that at the time, we felt like we ended up in a good place, and it would be a great pleasure to welcome her back. But I think in addition to that, reiterating all of the flexible working policies that we have, reminding people that they have enormous opportunity to flex their working day. They have the opportunity to reduce hours. They can take unpaid leave, they can take paid leave. There are all sorts of options, and people do not remember them in a time of stress or pressure. So it is about educating our leaders, our managers, and making sure that they are able to support with really practical guidance when something like this does happen. But I think it's becoming more and more common, and it's worrying because I think we lose some phenomenal talent from the organisation the whole time because people feel like they can't cope with all of these responsibilities, and we are in a position to help them. But if it's not broadly communicated, that becomes very limiting. So that's just one example.
No, that's very good. Thank you. And because of time, I want to be mindful of our time. I'm going to transition now. Thank you all for the wonderful depth that you gave to all of those questions. I want to make sure we get to some of the audience questions that have been submitted. So I will just read this. While the majority of caregiving responsibilities tend to fall on women, we have the opportunity to help shift towards parity. As a father of multiple children, one with Down syndrome and medical needs, as well as POA for a parent with special needs, it's sometimes disheartening to see the lack of acknowledgement and resources to support all family caregivers, or to support all caregivers versus female caregivers. How can we change that dialogue and ultimately help support all? Who would like to take that?
Well, I'm happy to kick off there, Sarah Beth. It is an issue, but interestingly, when in the UK we did the first work-life balance baseline survey in 2000, we found 16% of women in the workplace caring. We found 12% of men. There are almost equal numbers of men and women caring. They care differently. Women tend to care for a parent, men tend to care for a spouse, although both obviously have responsibility where there is a disabled child. Women do tend to provide more personal and heavy-end care, and they are supported differently. And they're supported differently both by services and by, very often, and sadly, by their employers. And so that's because there are assumptions that are made about the working role of men, and men as breadwinners. But we absolutely have to acknowledge that men are caring And sometimes their support needs are different and they need to be encouraged to disclose in very different ways. So when we work with an emergency service, for example, frontline service like the London Fire Brigade, one of the first things we understood really clearly is that firefighters, frontline firefighters who were caring, men caring and working on the front line, they needed to disclose anonymously. They were actually on watch with colleagues for years and never told them about the responsibilities they had and the pressures that they were under. But if you could help them to initially disclose safely and anonymously, eventually they did come forward and ask for support. So, you know, and we're not, I don't want to stereotype anyone, but it is an acknowledgement that sometimes it can be more challenging for men to ask for the support they need. We need to make it okay for everyone to have the conversation.
Thank you very much. Let's get to one more. Does the panel believe that training is required about how to support / manage carers? In my experience, not much is currently done to educate within the workplace. Okay, who can take that? Should managers training? Okay, Chris, please.
I'll start. I know one of the things that we do specific training each year for all of our managers, and it focuses on the multiple facets of diversity. And we take those opportunities each year to look at the information we're providing and the supports we're providing in each area. And I think as we've gone through it, you know, we've had very success with talking about people's differences, whether they're a caregiver, whether they are, you know, a different culture, you know, whatever the difference may be, we've had those conversations. And with it, we've added in the whole mental health component, because I think that piece also helps educate our managers on, you know, Nisha's talking about the women in the workforce. You've got a mom who's come back to work. Maybe she's had postpartum. You know, that's not a conversation you want to have with your manager, but understanding that people do have those differences. And I think we can take our caregiving opportunities now during COVID, continue those conversations and start to make it easier, and make it easier for those male caregivers as well. But I think okay.
That sounds good, and I'm so sorry. I just want to be mindful of time and keep us all on track. I think this has been thank you so much, Chris. I always hate to do that.
Okay.
This has been very, very valuable time, I believe, spent together. I always enjoy spending time with people who have not only the mindset, but the heart set to support working family caregivers, people in the sandwich generation. I thank all of the kind and thoughtful members of the panel, Madeline, Nisha, Chris. We've done a really, I think, broad swag at addressing this topic. The next session is beginning at the top of the hour. It's addressing the stigma of mental health and addiction in the workplace. And so I thank you. I hope that this has been time well spent for you, that you're walking away with some interesting insights and some best practices as well. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.